Mary, when you're talking to this, you have to talk like that, really close.
Close.
Really close. You got this.
I do have a stop that closer than this. This.
Hello.
Hello. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see my director table has been stolen in the back. Oh, well. Yeah, make sure your phone is off.
My phone.
That's always embarrassing. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to go back and introduce our colleagues that are here this afternoon and kick things off. Actually, we should turn the screen slightly. Nobody can see it. There we go. Can everybody see the screen now? Is that better? Okay. So this afternoon we have with us Adam Bresnick, who is key distinguished professor right here in black. Adam is an alum of the program. We have Lawrence Caudle here from Hickok Cole Architects, who is also an alum. This afternoon we have with us Denny Ruggieri is over here, who's a colleague of ours from the Department of Landscape Architecture. Welcome. We have Irina Savakova of Leo A. Daly Architects, also an alumna. And then Michael Salisbury at the end down here from Air St. Gross Architects in Baltimore. And again, a part of the alum crew here today. It's going to be alum rumble going on here. And so this afternoon we have two theses to look at. Mary Boulay is going to start us off in throwing me a bone here. The location is Norfolk. That's the word I want. Couldn't remember the word Norfolk, Virginia, looking at affordable housing and the homelessness crisis. Her chair was Andressa Martinez. I was on the committee, and Dan Curry. And take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Bully, and I'll be presenting Rebuilding Lives, Architecture to Solve Affordable Housing and Homelessness Crisis. So addressing homelessness crisis in general, it's really a systemic issue. It's increasing, and 20% of the population has faced severe housing issues in 2023 in the United States. If we're looking at statistically, that is 1 in 5 people, which it really is an urgent matter that we must look into and really address. In 2024, there was actually an increase of 18% since 2023. And in the HUD article, it was said, you guys see, okay. It was said that there was an estimated of 800,000 people that actually experienced some sort of form of homelessness, whether that would be living in their cars or sort of just having rent issues and all of that stuff. So looking into Norfolk specifically, a lot of questions that had been asked was why Norfolk? Norfolk is really a smaller scale city in comparison to other large scale cities of like San Diego or Washington, D.C., and they have a homeless board community that is established. However, there is no real thriving plan that associates with homelessness there. So looking at the two photos in 2020, there was tent cities on schoolyards. So really along the schoolyards and daycares, that was really an issue, and the community did not like that. And then in 2024, in Wesley United Methodist Church, which is the church that's actually across the site of my building that is actually across the site that I have chosen. And here they actually house up to 10 to 20 people in a room. So it's very crowded, and it's really a big issue that needs to be looked into. This really led to the thesis question of how can affordable housing decrease homelessness in Norfolk by guiding policymakers in developing long-term strategies, allowing architects to design innovative solutions, and improving coordination among nonprofits and community organizations. So looking at sort of different maps of Norfolk itself, choosing the site location was really key to addressing these issues. A lot of homelessness population is majority down south, which is in the downtown region of Norfolk, but choosing a site that is actually sort of up north in this area that has the needs, but not the supplies and utilities that the downtown areas have. So looking at where are the highest rates of unemployment, as well as household income, home price, rental price. And really this led to my overall site decision to be located up north here by the Norfolk Naval Base. So going into the overall history of the site, it was annexed in 1955, and in 1965 there was continuation of growth, and later on there was really an expansion. And then in the 1970s, that is when they started building public housing there, especially in the site that is here. And then in 2011, it was actually demolished just because the community and the city of Norfolk deemed that this general area was not safe. It was very crime heavy. There were a lot of alleyways, and there were no urban green spaces that led to the community wanting the spaces to be there. And present day now, it is really just a suburban community. Sort of just a site analysis, looking at land use, it's primarily surrounded by residential areas. The zoning itself is in a multifamily neighborhood scale, meaning a lot of townhomes or row homes are often built rather than being in an area that's situated around single-family homes. The mobility itself is really important because with homelessness, oftentimes they do not drive cars, and so having a good public infrastructure to connect them to the places that they have to go is really key, as well as looking into walkability of how far grocery stores are, as well as health services that are there. And in this case, where the site is, it's about a 5 to 10 minute walk to the nearest grocery store. Just looking at sort of site images of the context that's around, it's really a rough, a flat land area, but the site has a lot of context buildings that are roughly 2 to 3 stories high. And a lot of them are sort of just regular apartment housings that are there. And then one thing to note about the site itself is that there's actually a development that is happening in progress. So the site is located here in red, but where the nearest grocery store is, there's actually a full redevelopment project that has been taking place. It is scheduled to be 8 to 10 years of project development, but what they are doing is including more apartments, townhomes, and really creating a more commercial street front along this area and trying to make it a more walkable, safe city space for the communities that are there and giving them the amenities and amenities that they need. So tying this into the program zones that I have developed, the main focus has been residential living. Ideally, after leaving the homeless shelter program, they would transition into this transitional housing where they would live here for 2 to 5 years. It's going to be rooms with basic amenities, as well as accessible units for everyone, and family units for larger groups. And around that, there will be 3 additional zones that will help with the support and stability of the people. So Unity Commons really is the communal spaces, so outdoor gathering spaces, providing more multi-purpose rooms for the people, as well as having communal lounge areas. And then having this nourishing nexus zone, which is really the kitchen zone, and it is where there's going to be a central kitchen, dining areas, as well as promoting communal eating, as well as having cooking classes to really promote self-sufficiency. And then there is this wellness grove, which is the social services. This is where job training, health support systems will all be taking place, as well as trying to help them rehabilitate back into life and having these counseling rooms, offices, and admin offices for their needs. So after speaking with the Norfolk Community Board, there was actually stages of homelessness that has been processed through. So stage 1 is the newly admitted. This is really where the crisis support takes place. What they do is they have a really structured routine for these individuals. They provide immediate safety, shelter, structure, and stability for them. They often have these folks within close proximity to the staff offices as well as case manager. They often are participating in low stimulus activities, so a lot of self-reflecting, quiet times on their own, and light engagement in communal meals and areas. Stage 2 is more of a transitional zone. This is really the engagement and autonomy building. So oftentimes, people who are in this transitional stage is really when they begin to develop agency, responsibility, and social integration. This is where they begin to really have job readiness classes and um, building the skills needed to help them get to the spaces and places that they would ideally like to be. Stage 3 is really the stabilizing phase, and this is really independence and reconnection. So this fosters readiness for independent living and reintegration in society. This is really focused on more of securing permanent housing, employment, and external relationships, as well as more participation in communal events. So here are 3 users that are each in different stages. So meeting Darius, he's in stage 1, which is the newly admitted. And in this case, Darius, he has essentially suffered from like mental health issues, and he is really newly admitted into this program, and this is his first time essentially being homeless, and he is 21 years old. Tanisha and Amari, they're in the stage 2, they're transitional, so a single mother with a child. So Tanisha is 35 years old and Amari is 5 years old. And ideally they lost their homes essentially due to the rent hike. And meeting Michael, he's in stage 3, which is really the stabilizing phase. He's 55 years old, and he lost his job and also suffered from medical debt. All of their needs are very much different, but the architectural systems that has been developed will essentially address their needs. So how are these systems being developed? So going into talking about the site massing and strategies, what has been done was a shift of rectangular blocks, and by having these shifts of rectangular blocks, they are creating these sort of moments of open private garden spaces for the people, as well as creating sort of a pathway that leads through allowing more of a communal public space to be made, and having this corner building really be the support spaces for the for the homeless population, and having communal spaces for the community as well as the people living there. This really ties into the factors of building community. So in this case, there is the community building that has sort of different amenities that are for the people that are within the neighborhood, as well as the users themselves. So offering library spaces, event spaces that could be multi-purpose used for farmers markets. And then there will be a distinction between the men residential building and the women and families residential building, but each will still have these private little landscape moments where it's the private gardens for the people. And then just sort of having this weave of public space that runs through where it's for the community and not just for the residents. Tying into that, so sort of zooming into like sort of the site plan of what is going on in these general areas. So in this case, this is just like a gazebo space that could be resting for the community, as well as a little garden space for them to sit at. And then there are also community gardens beds, which is where the residential people who actually live there, as well as the community, can come together and learn how to produce food, and really have a food production course throughout their weeks, and just sort of learn and bond and rehabilitate together. And the second factor of having these additional shifts and looking at really the architectural systems of the grid and structure, the whole focus of this was creating flexible spaces. So by having this grid, it allows flexibility for the units to actually be infilled. So what is happening is that the ground floor slabs and the more permanent structures of the beams and columns are essentially built on site, and that's establishing more permanence there. Yes, so here's like a better view of what exactly is happening on the ground floor. So here we have a central core, which is the primary vertical circulation. And then ideally this core is surrounded by 2 large outdoor rooms, which are they have these nano walls, which allow the transition of creating sort of event spaces for the people there, as well as having a sense of privacy and sort of different views looking out into the landscape in correlation to the structure that is happening of creating those sort of grids that are there. And then tying in the ground floor programs with landscape itself. So ideally these 2 big programmatic rooms are going to be used by the people and the users themselves. So having different classes throughout these spaces is really a flexible space for the people to utilize and used throughout the day, as well as addressing the sort of different stages of the people that are there. So, for example, Darius in this case, he's oftentimes probably in the quiet zone, or Tanisha and Amari, they're most likely in the peer support groups or the food production classes, and then Michael probably most likely being in like communal event spaces because he's already in this stabilizing phase where he's often reconnecting with others there. And then looking at the architectural systems of just a typical floor, this is really where that central core is brought back up. But what is happening here is that there is a gridded system that follows, and this is where the units would be infilled. The units themselves are prefabricated, and there are typically a studio, 1 bedroom, and 2 bedroom. But going into the actual units themselves, each units will have utility pods, which are prefabricated and essentially plugged in. This addresses the plumbing issues as well as the overall issues of how these things would work as a prefabricated system. And then going into the units themselves, so what's happening here is that there's a typical studio unit, which is 10 foot by 20 foot with this little break of a 2 foot glass entry space, which allows light, natural light to come into the small studio spaces. And with these studio units, there's actually a pattern that happens where if you add in another unit, essentially that will become a typical 1 bedroom unit. And then adding an additional unit to that would become a typical 2 bedroom unit. But if we were to take out these units and not have it programmatically be used as a residential space, it could also just be transformed into really a typical amenity space. So with each units, there's actually multiple users that can be addressed here. So in this case, for the studios, it could be for any single occupant that is there. For the 1 bedrooms, this is ideally for more of like couples or a single family, a single mother with her child. And then the 2 bedroom units being primarily for larger families or even extended families that are often living together. Oftentimes in Norfolk, there's also a case where there are single mothers with children, but they would not want to live in 1 bedroom by themselves just because they don't feel safe. And this is really when the 2 bedroom units could be combined, and it would be bringing 2 single mothers with their children living in the 2 bedroom units just because that's how they feel safer. And overall impact on users, although all of the users have different needs and wants, they are all utilizing these public spaces as well as the units and spaces themselves together, and the landscape areas as well as just different areas. So the architecture itself really is a flexible system that can be used for all. And concluding with the impact in Norfolk themselves, by having this flexible system, we are able to have 150 studio units for the men's. And then for the women's and families, they would have 8 2 bedroom units typically, 8 1 bedroom units, and 48 studio woman units. In total, this brings 214 units to the area in Norfolk. And really, this is a system to strategy play by using modular elements and prefabricated structures. This allows more units to be made and infilled, which addresses the affordable housing issues as well as homelessness crisis. And it can also be manipulated and adaptable to many urban other contexts by utilizing these systems. Thank you. I'm open to any questions and comments.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Really, that's a wonderful analysis that you did in the beginning. I really appreciate it. Norfolk is a very challenging city. We've done some work there. It does definitely have a pretty tough housing problem as well as a flooding problem. But so I presume your site is off the water somewhere. It's not, didn't seem to be close to.
Yeah, it's located near the base itself. One thing that I had forgot to mention was that
Yeah.
although it is located near the base, a lot of families who aren't associated with the military themselves, they don't benefit from the military aspects.
Okay. There's a lot to talk about here. The scope of your presentation is terrific. I really appreciate you sharing your analysis here, or your sketchy thoughts here on paper here. It's great to see that process. It's wonderful to see all the little bits and pieces of models here. I will not tear anything apart. It's a little joke. We were talking about that at lunchtime. What's really fascinating about this is your approach about the components and or it's not really, it's components, right? It's pods. This is not really
Yes.
modular, like prefabricated constructed pieces. It's a kit of parts,
Yes.
so to speak. So this is a really, really clear diagram that I sort of get where you're going for. There's always two sides of this coin. Do you do fully modular and ship it to the site, or you do it in components?
Right.
And I can then clearly understand how your design, and I think you have a series of attractive buildings here that you were able to pull through of this. And I really get this. This is really good. I think and by the way, the section drawing is a very nice drawing. I
you.
appreciate that. And all the diagrams that go along with these pieces and components. What the challenging thing is with using this type of stuff is like, how do you fit it with everything else? Because you
Right.
have a very rich program and yet you've got to use the same components over and over and over again. So I'm just going to lay it out there. I think this is great. By the way, your project is terrific. So I'm really going to get into nitty gritty and some things. When I look at the site planning aspect, I love the sliding bars aspect. And then you're in this, your challenge was, I've got these regular buildings that I got to do all these different programs with, right?
Right.
So how do I create the richness out of that? And what I'd like to hear more about, you talk about it, maybe others had the same question, is like, when I look at the ground floor, where you have that color diagram, well, this space is going to be used for this space is going to be used for that, it could very well work. But maybe there was something a step further, particularly on the ground floor, about using the outdoor spaces,
Yes.
which didn't have to fall into that.
Yes.
Like maybe you created a really strong connective tissue with that also helped define these different uses. And
Right.
it didn't quite go there
Yeah.
in some ways. I mean, there's a lot of ground space. You have a
Yes.
lot of work to do here on the outside.
Yeah.
The landscape design is almost as much as the building design.
Yes. One thing that I wanted to note about having these sort of private garden spaces, if there were events that were essentially happening on these platform levels, ideally, if it's out open into this landscaped areas, the event could essentially just take place outdoors. So it's a transition of inside and outside and having that blend. So by having those little private garden spaces, it really connected the people and just didn't make them feel like they were alone. Yeah.
So I see your basic idea of having kind of stage 1 through stage 3.
Right.
But I didn't hear you explain kind of whether the entire site and has kind of a transitional aspect to it where stage 1 is closer to mental health kind of facilities and maybe some drug treatment and all of those things that you're going to need to be more supervised and more connected to health.
Yes.
Right. And then as you go through to stage 3, maybe you're actually in a place where you have more independence.
Right.
We actually do this with universities as the way that we design residence halls. You know, when you're a freshman,
Yes.
you're more controlled, you're more watched, and as you go through and become a senior, you're off on your own, more independent. Is that it? I don't see that. Maybe, but I don't see that in the plan. It looks like.
Yes. With the users and the different stages that are taking places, the idea was to have everyone sort of living in sort of the same building and program, but it's just their structured routines are different and they go according to whatever time they have to be there and also whatever spaces they're going to take place essentially. So it's giving them that freedom that they do have the schedule to follow, but essentially also giving them that aspect, okay, you are your own individual, but we ideally would love if you would come to these spaces on your own and they would be more motivated to essentially get there.
Well, first, I would like to commend you. This is outstanding body of work, and the level of analysis, the level of thought of how you can make this seamless in terms of how you transition people through the different stages. So when they're in this predicament, and how you can support this to the architectural thought, going back to, it almost feels like modular and visiting some of the old ways of not outdated, but already tried and true, and you have expanded upon it. So that's really, really remarkable. I really appreciate the fact that you've included process of all types, Because as you go through your career, you'll acquire new tools, but the process and how you come to a thought is always important. So that's pretty outstanding. I have to tell you, this is a very dear to my heart and mind typology, because I currently am finishing one transitional housing in Prince George's County, and I actually second one in early phases of design, and two more that I have finished in all different jurisdictions, from Washington, D.C. to Anacostia to Prince George's County. I would like to share a personal experience with working with the residents, interviewing everyone, and working with the community. You have solved, because you're in the abstract land of academia, the challenge of getting the community on board. Then, despite the fact that community is sometimes coming from these type of units,
Yeah.
they'll fight you like there is no tomorrow. So brace yourself when you enter the real world.
Okay.
It's not for the faint at heart. Aesthetically advancing an idea to make it look like it is not transitional housing is the first step. When you get there, like what you have accomplished here, always go back to context and go back to the roots of what makes this belong. So it's not abstract. I have to
Okay.
tell you, the moment I walked in and looked at the graphics, wonderful graphics, I was wondering, are we in California or in another place? Because I
Yeah.
could not guess the location. And it's a good thing. But it also has its caveats. So creating a sense of community that is not too abstract is important. Going sometimes back to the modular aspect, where you can bring variety and plug in pieces that
Yeah.
actually belong to a context, does matter. Being able to create a sense of privacy for these people, that at the first stage, they really cannot come to terms with the predicament that they're in. They're in denial, there is anger, there is so much more to it. Being in spaces that we all enjoy, as being privileged to live in the world that we live without too many restrictions, is wonderful for us. Sometimes for them,
Yes.
that much daylight and being exposed to the real world
Mhm.
is a challenge. So
Yeah.
you really have to listen to these voices. So
Yes.
I will suggest using more pieces that will allow you to create more privacy for stage one.
Okay.
The separation between, and I will describe it as an effortless separation between the different stages, is a must. Being able to provide access to emergency medical care, to mental health and all that without being in those residents' faces, truly important, because safety and security of the entire community depends on it. And it's a matter of minutes sometimes, and you have to react. But it needs to be done in such a way that it's done with dignity and respect, so you don't take away from what you're trying to build. And I believe it's really important. I will suggest that you don't neglect one residential type that is really important in here, and it's called a dorm. Most jurisdictions deal with financial limitations, and in transitional housing, you design a dorm type of sleeping quarters where, whether you like it or not, you have 6 or 8 beds that will fit into that room, and that's the reality. Being able, in your brilliant system that is so flexible, to be able to accommodate that, then you can solve the fluctuation of the economic world that you have to deal with.
Yes.
And I'll highly recommend that. But try to go from the abstract to this, I'll describe it in a crude methodology, site adjust to the actual context. In this case, you're next to the water, so it's the beauty of bringing that breeze in and all that. It's wonderful. Try to explore further when you go to your next projects of what else you can bring in to make it context appropriate, and you can drive from the culture, from the layers of presence over there. And I have no doubts that you'll have a very successful career forward, seeing what you have here on this
Thank
board.
you.
Really great comments. I was actually going to point out context as well, because curiously and similar to the project we saw before lunch, to me the most the information that we need to understand the project is in the presentation and not on the wall, especially in the sense of the context, because there's a highway to the left.
Yes.
There's that new development, which you pointed out.
Yes.
And so I think there's some design decisions like the bar building, the cranked bar, which I believe is sort of a buffer to the highway. So a lot of that is, we can understand, but it's hard, we have to remember. So I wish that information was here because it would make this more legible. The second is the sense of space and the sense of place, which I think Karina also touched on. To me, it feels a bit corporate, and I wonder if that's the appropriate language. And I also, in terms of context, what are the houses nearby looking like? You know, are they pitched roofed? Are they flat roofs? Or, you know, I mean, I'm not a fan of, I'm a fan of modern, but I do think we need to make them feel like it's a home as well.
Yes.
Finally, it's very diagrammatic, which I think is good because it's flexible. But then I also would want to understand more the bioclimatic aspects, which I think Karina hit every point that I was gonna say, because, you know, where's north, where's south, you know, obviously north, we know where it is, but how does this work with the real nitty gritty of Norfolk, you know?
Right. One thing that I wanted to note about that, so with creating the sense of place, that was something that I had explored a lot on. Initially, I had gone through the stages of, is it going to be a rectangular building, or are the roofs going to be able to match the context of what is happening? But when it came down to actually designing and looking at it, it read more of as one big house that is um, hosting the homeless people in there, rather than an actual home for the people to actually claim an independent space for themselves. And I also spoke with a lot of the community board members in Norfolk about this, and it was interesting to note that for them, a lot of the residents there who are homeless, they do suffer with this really strong sense of privacy. And for them, ideally how they go through this process is sort of just asking them, what kind of place would you want to live in? And a lot of times people would opt for like a studio or one bedrooms. And so in this case, the studios were probably the most efficient for creating that sense of privacy. And the facade itself really is this sort of sun shading devices, but by having these louvered screens, it creates that sense of privacy for them, because it's a very animated facade where they're able to create that sense of privacy of how much light they want to and how much they would want to look out into these spaces. So it's really what I sort of went through this process was trying to figure out, how do I create that balanced sense of space for them, sense of place for them, but also creating a space where they feel more dignified in.
Yeah, I think it's a very good proposal. It's a fascinating topic, and I think one that we need to become more sort of we need to design more like different kind of sort of lifestyles and housing options for different people. So I think I appreciate that you took that on. To me, one of the things that is unclear is how the landscape participates in all of this. Like I look at your schedule there and I see that there's some kind of activity outdoors.
Yes.
But I think that schedule could actually have a little bit more purposeful sort of, definition of landscape
Yes.
experience. So I'm thinking, physical well-being.
Yes.
There's the healing that comes from being close to biophilia,
Right.
biophilic experiences. That might not be something that you get from a community garden all the time.
Yes.
You may need a more intimate space. So that could have helped you also then
Yes.
arrange this landscape and see a little bit more of this kind of green as a mosaic of
Yes.
like green tonalities that represent different degrees of connection to this. The other thing that I'm interested, I work in a co-housing community in Northern Italy, and there is this tension between creating a place for permanent, for, to address the issue at hand. There too, it's people that have either their home challenge, or the court may have, require them to be in a safe place, and the need to actually establish roots. So I wonder, did you ever think about kind of a aging in place type of idea? And if does it only end at the stage of stabilizing? What can we think? There's plenty of room here to even think about permanence, and that permanence is also a good story that can help the people that are entering the process to see that that there is a future ahead. Whereas you kind of stop at sort of the taking care of the issue, as if that issue then doesn't become, as if there's no life afterwards. but there would be a life afterwards. So in that case, some of these units, right now you're, sort of allocating studios, but they could be, I could see these 4 studios become a family sort of room, right? Or, a few of these connecting and becoming a partnership of sorts. Maybe with another man, if it's possible, because I assume that there's, there's all sorts of different kind of elements. So I think that is something that I think I would explore more.
Yes.
Of course, the thesis is limited. And then the last thing is eyes on the park and on the landscape. You put all the same units overlooking the landscape. And I think that, if I remember, there was Dolores Hayden looked at this kind of relationship of the kitchen to the backyard. So I feel like maybe even the arrangement of some of these units it would be interesting to have actually eyes on these kind of public landscapes. Right now, they have essentially the eyes are on the space in between, if I understand correctly from your drawing. So most of the windows and visual access is to these very nondescript sort of spaces. So flipping that would have been interesting, and maybe that is your partie. I think your partie is good and it helped you, but thinking about rotating some of these, starting to creating a sense of enclosure could have helped a little bit more and added to this kind of eyes on the street. So just a few thoughts.
One thing I wanted to point out, and it's because you made beautiful diagrams and we can appreciate it. I would say that one thing we all did when we were in school is make diagrams, but didn't necessarily let the diagrams inform us about the things that we're learning from them and kind of the spaces between these buildings. And is this narrow? Is it canyon-like? But do we want use the diagram to help inform you about the design?
Yeah.
I think but overall, including scales, including north arrows, you're miles ahead. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to, I want to go circle back around because the opportunity that once you got this down, and this is not easy, then it became fascinating when I started going to how do those spaces relate? And I think what everybody's getting at is that the program is so rich, and you're right, the adjacencies here are so critical to the success of this transitional community. But just the idea that once you got that simple box down, you have this bit of a sliding diagram, you can pick up those boxes and place them and relate them in different ways that would have then created so many different connective tissues. And that would automatically change how those buildings relate and then could begin to address. And that's the challenge when you've got such a rigorous thing like this, because we work with clients who, I can't do one project like this. I've got to do 10 and then maybe I break even, right? Because building these components, being innovative, doing it is so challenging. So that's why I love the idea, but then you have to prove to somebody that, no, I can relate them this way and this is how it changes the very nature of it without changing it. And that's what's challenging but wonderful about this approach. So that's why, circling back around, it was about creating more variety between the outdoor spaces. So I'm kind of restating what other people are saying already, but it's really key. And again, it's such an amazing starting point to be able to have that conversation. So thank you. I think it's great.
I wanted to point out something over here in Mary's process that I found to be very interesting. One morning I was talking to Mary, it was a Monday morning, we were talking and she showed me this series of little diagrams here and I looked at them and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, what's this all about? And I was really skeptical to start with when I was looking at them. And all of a sudden I went, no. Actually, later that afternoon, I was talking with a group of students in Architecture 407, and I was trying to get them to do versions of things, variations on themes. And all of a sudden I realized that you had done that. And what had helped you to do this gazillion little series of diagrams was the fact that they were so small that you couldn't solve anything in it.
you could just see the different patterns in that, and you could assign a quality to things that were cellular and things that were open space. And you didn't get stuck on where's the bathroom, where's the janitor's closet, where's all this kind of stuff. And then it kind of continued at a variety of different scales, each time becoming more and more specific. It made me think as a prelude to doing, let's say, versioning on a computer, in which case oftentimes people are just looking at it and go, oh, the computer gave me this, that maybe people should start this way first and then understand what the computer is doing for you to speed up that process. I found that to be very useful, and I found your thesis opened up a way of thinking to me that then I brought to another group of students. So I just want to thank you. And I know that you've been scrambling for the past 2 weeks to pull everything together. You did a great job at that. I'm going to pass this back to your chair back here.
Oops. First of all, congratulations, Mary. She's my
you.
first thesis student here. And I'm happy because I could share this moment with you, and also we've been working for almost 9 months.
Yeah.
She had an incredible research process, design process. She could talk more, like she could show the physical models. She was trying to do other systems, digitally fabricated house. She could mention how the neighbors or they could help to build or renovate the units. Then there's a lot. Then I'm very glad, I'm happy with the process, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to pivot to this wall. I think we have to find Christophe. So we're going to pivot to this side over here, and we'll get Christophe to come up here. We'll take just a couple seconds, get ourselves going again.
No, that's someone definitely reached.
Why don't we in the wrong place. Don't use this table. Yeah, let me get something else.
Well, this better be good.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you, ma'am. They're down low enough so people can see it. Oh, good luck. Nothing, that won't work on that. Only will work on that. Okay, it reflects on that. Yeah. Okay. Whew, there we are. So the final thesis project this afternoon takes us to Baltimore. And Christoph Tanis is going to be looking at a project involving adaptive reuse. His committee consisted of Professor Matthew Bell as chair, Professor Ken Filler, and myself. And take it away.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming. Let's get started. Alrighty, make it to vibrant. Adaptive reuse as a tool for revitalizing the city. So starting with the abstract urban evolution, cities are constantly evolving. They're growing, adapting, shrinking, and etc. Historic structures are often too demolished in the name of progress. This leads to cultural loss, unsustainable sprawl, and a lot of community displacement. So what's the question? What if we didn't have to start over, but we could start with what's already there? And this leads into my thesis statement. How can adaptive reuse design strategies support city revitalization and better placemaking? The power of adaptive reuse. So adaptive reuse is more than renovation, it's reimagination. It meets today's needs while honoring yesterday's character and to create without erasing. And to take it also into account, it's not a design restraint. And one of the precedents that I have here is the Domino Sugar Factory in New York City, pre-intervention where there was an existing facade and a later intervention where they infilled the building. Adaptive reuse beyond nostalgia. To apply adaptive reuse to today, we need to follow mainly 6 different points in order to hit all the marks. Historic preservation, sustainability, cultural impact, economic opportunity, community integration, and smarter development. And with that, with this project, I put together a kit of parts approach. This is a design approach for adaptive reuse that goes through 6 different design strategies to kind of renew the project. 1, you can shift the existing structure, completely manipulate it into something new. Vertical addition, adding something on top of it. Wrapping it, putting new architectural all the way around. Attachment, putting a little buddy side building right next to it. Reskinning, redoing the whole facade. And gutting it, taking away all the interior. This then leads to my project, the Hendler Creamery on 1100 East Baltimore Street in Baltimore, Maryland. The Hendler Creamery is located right outside of the downtown area within Baltimore and is located in Jonestown. Within a 5-minute and 10-minute walking radius, there isn't really a lot of resources for the people within the area. On the top right corner, there's the Johns Hopkins Hospital, and on the lower end, I said again, the downtown area. Now, zooming in, this is the currently existing Hendler Creamery lot with the existing building on the south left side. And within the area, there are really some important buildings to take into account for site analysis. The McKim Center is a small Greek building, which is a community center for the people within Baltimore. And right next to that is the Ronald McDonald House. This is a building for housing for families with children that are in urgent care, need sufficient medical help, and those kids most likely will be staying in Johns Hopkins up the street. Next is the UA Living Classroom Center. So this is a building made by Under Armour. This is a kind of career rehab, career development center. So you can go over your GED, SAT, career development, and etc. And to the left of the site is the Baltimore Health Department, as well as a adjacent parking lot. And that's what we have here today. So around the site, there are 3 remaining facades left. E. Fairmont Street Avenue is actually an existing site on one of the sides of the building. East side faces an alleyway. East Baltimore Street is the main street, and Fayette Street located to the north on the other side. So right now, here are the 3 existing elevations going around the site. And a little bit of a timeline to get more into the background. The existing building didn't always stay like that. Obviously, it was a building before there were only 3 facades left. With the original design, it was originally the Baltimore City Passenger Railway, and later on, it was bought out by Lionel Handler, which he turned that into one of the first fully automated ice cream factories within the United States. And throughout time, he kept the building expanded and took more areas within the lot, ultimately sold it to the government, and as of right now, it's in a process of demolition. So a little bit about the impact of the area. The Handler Creamery was a pretty important local business within the Baltimore area. They had really good ice cream. They sold to about 400 plus different stores around the DMV area. And had their own little horse and cottage. So decline and controversy. So in 2007, it was registered within the National Registry of Historic Places, and preservationists, historians, and local citizens advocated for saving the structure, but the government ultimately approved demolition in 2024 for new development as they didn't see any more uses for the building. And that's how it sadly looks like. I wouldn't say today because this was taken back in 2024, so I doubt the building is still here today. Proposal, the McKim Recreation Center and the new Handler Hall. So for this proposal, I'm going to hit these different program goals of economic generation, environmental integration, community restoration, and the site as a cultural hub. And with that, I'll take my kit apart approach and apply 2 of the 6 strategies with the redesign and gutted strategy, and apply that to the existing structure with the only 3 of the facades left. And going back a little bit from start to finish, 1892 till now, it expanded, took more places within the lot, got demolished, and only left 3 sides of the facade for a while, and then onto the potential and my integrations within the project. So my integrations include the restoration of the Handler Creamery into the Handler Hall and a recreation center, as well as a play area interacting with the McKim Center. And with that, the Handler Hall, you can eat, have different fresh produce, a food hall, and the recreation center we'll get to next. Starting from the sub or ground floor, the recreation center does have a pool. Fun fact, there isn't a short course meter pool within a pretty wide radius within the city of Baltimore. And with this, the citizens in the area can have official high school and college meets, and they don't have to drive probably all the way inland in Maryland. And so with that, on the ground floor, there's retail on Fayette Street within the adjacent building. And within the Handler Hall are the main stalls for the food hall slash produce hall area, as well as excessive seating. Next, on the upper floor plan of the hall, there's the outdoor area. Within the outdoor terrace, some more accessory halls on the left side. And the upper floor plan for the recreational hall includes a gym, studios, and 2 full-size basketball courts for the people of the area. And then there is also a mezzanine floor with more gym space, as well as a running track above the basketball court. So this is Handler Hall, taking what was already there and applying new things to it. So now, people within the Baltimore area have a kind of new grocery store slash food center where people can eat, interact, have fun, and it stays with the integrity of the city and the integrity of the area. And what's fun about this also, it also integrates with the McKim Center and giving it a little bit of a green space so people within the community center can kind of extend their program and activity. So the future is already built. We can take what we have and rehabilitate it and create something that'll be better for our future and be better for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation, wonderful research, very well composed. I admire the choice of topic. Adaptation and creative adaptive reuse is what's going to save our urban environments and what's going to keep the history alive. It's really important to have layers of presence and different historic lines, and you've timed it really well the way you composed it. So it's quite a remarkable work.
Thank you.
What you have done. I also, to piggyback on some comments that were done earlier, I like that you have tried to get a lot of content on the boards at different scales and creating hierarchies so we can, as reviewers, can actually go back and reference certain aspects of the work that you already presented in the PowerPoint. I think it's really important to be able to offer that synthesis. You, in my opinion, you've tackled a very complex program, chose the right pieces for the needs of that area, and that's remarkable in itself. You're correct. The closest Olympic-sized facility where Michael Phelps used to swim is here on campus, because I used to run into him as I was teaching my 2-year-old to swim once upon a time. So facilities of this kind are absolutely necessary. I will only offer a word of encouragement when you study the urban fabric, because that will give you notions and ideas of how to get to the granular level and to the smaller scale type of programming. Your NULI plan needs to be of a broader part of Baltimore. It's really capture a greater area so you can study the patterns and you can find clues that you might miss otherwise. And when you look at the historic facades and what is preserved, try to utilize every single piece that is there that you can reuse and incorporate into the new stuff that you do. I'll give an example of something that done a few years ago. There is an abandoned power plant in near Minneapolis, Ottawa power station, that was converted, and we're going to be converting it for the 3rd time into another adaptive reuse. We used every single bolt, every single little grommet that we found, and incorporated it into terrazzo, and you name it, because every single piece that was left alone, you can breathe life into it. And that's what gives it character, that's what gives it presence, that's what makes it belong. I will also encourage you to, when you study what is existing, because the best building is the one that already exists, that's the greenest one. Try to get the compositional principle, the scales, the elements into the new part that you're adding. Try to stay away from generic that's predictable to look like something that you're already adding to. But you've conquered so much and you've accomplished a lot, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a great project, and working and kind of spending a lot of time in Baltimore, I know that this precedent would work and it would be successful and welcome in the community. I think that, some of the things I think I would turn some of it inwards. I would make a kind of a small, I see some of the retail is pointed up towards Fayette Street rather than down towards the beer garden, and let that be an active place where people are walking through and coming through the transitioning through the garden and then through the beer garden. I think that could be very successful. Just for fun, I would look closer at what it would take to have a pool, a natatorium with a gymnasium above it, and see kind of what that depth would create, because what it's going to do is it's going to change, particularly what Karina is talking about, where that's going to be a bigger building.
Right.
And it's going to have a different proportion than the existing one. And
Right.
so it will be something that it's a different kind of building.
Right.
So that's fine. But yeah, I mean, it's well put together, and I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah, I'm going to second what my colleagues have said here. I really love that you tackled this problem. I loved hearing I loved your 6 diagrams of the building is how I deal with an existing building. You know, the whole perspective, we deal with so much existing fabric.
Right.
And you can put very modern buildings next to very historic buildings.
Right.
And that's what I want to talk a little bit of. First of all, one urbanistically thing I have to point to it. I think others were beginning to get there. This whole space seemed a little bit, from a planning aspect, a little bit of a lost opportunity.
Yep.
I understand what's happening in section here. The pool is below. By the way, I think that was a good move to bring the heights of the building down, was to sink it.
Right.
That's a mature thought, so applaud that. But yeah, I think he's right about saying, you know, what, not just here, but there was a whole missed opportunity here. The thing that I would like to challenge you with is, I think you played it too safe. I think once you decided that I'm going to blow this part of the building away, and I'm going to insert some new intervention that is there, then I'm a little disappointed that it looks good. It looks good. Just to have fun with it, because wouldn't we all? I'm disappointed that it looks too similar to what's there. And the fabric almost feels a little too historic.
Yeah.
I mean, these buildings are kind of mediating, right? Maybe that was the right thing to do, and they're handsome buildings. I wanted that piece to be just wow and special, right? Just hyper contrast between what is there and what's not.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing design opportunity. The last thing I'll say is that this is a great 3D visual. I worry, this is for everybody using these tools, how thin some of the renderings can feel with the materiality. Because at this scale, the materiality adds so much, right? And as you go in your career, you're going to learn what that materiality is. But yeah, don't think twice about how these things are drawn. They feel a little bit thin. So if you got the opportunity to just take one view and say, this is really my material of choice, not what the computer said. I'm being a
Right.
little crude by say that. I don't really, I am.
No worries.
But you understand what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
program sort of locks you in, and you don't let it do that.
Thank you.
I think my colleagues have covered most of the terrain. I completely agree with the Noli plan is not a Noli plan, because you need to show the city, and you need to show like so much more of the context in these other buildings that you pointed out in the analysis of the area. I think there's a lack of tectonics and a lack of understanding of what the old building is made out of and what the new buildings are made out of, and that goes completely with Lawrence's comments about the 3Ds, and that's something we're seeing all morning. There's sort of, to me, a lack of understanding of how that old building is put together and how that would contrast with how the new building would be put together. And it's a little too matchy right now. And I think that's a field of exploration key to adaptive reuse, which is dear to my heart, as Karina said before, a very good phrase. So it's a great start and an ambitious project, and that's really good.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I really appreciated the way you started off with your diagrams of strategies for adaptive reuse. And I wish that had come back onto your boards here, because that's an important part of your project here. And I think it gets to the tectonics that Professor Bresnick's talking about. And I think also, because this is adaptive reuse, that it would have been a good idea to keep showing us before and after. And that would have helped us to really understand, where's your innovation happening, not just out on the street, but
Right.
inside there. You know, I pretty sure I understand what's new, but I think that that's a really important part of the story because this building is so interesting. Something else that's an important part of the story is which era you chose to return to. You know, you could have taken it back to its original, but you decided on a particular point in history, then you introduce now.
Right.
And, you know, we can imagine this building is going to go on and have more lives like a cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would bring back that kind of theory of how do you do adaptive reuse?
You were next and then. But I wanted to jump in and just say,
Yeah.
because I'm running the show here, I just wanted to jump in and say, if you back up the slides to the slide that shows the building today, there's a photograph of the building as it is today. And this gets directly to this question of now, one more, keep going. There's another one that's more
That's the
frontal.
new, okay.
There's one that's more frontal. Yeah, I guess that's the one. I guess that's the only one we get.
The one from the.
Yeah, it's the same one. I'm sorry. I thought there was a better one. Yeah, that's the one I
Yeah.
wanted. Okay. So what your proposition is really doing and what makes your proposition possible is that they built this skeletal frame to add lateral bracing to that facade. And then you can go in and excavate the center of this building. And then your building is going to need to provide that lateral bracing from the inside of the building before you can actually dismantle that facade. So there's a whole tectonic question about how this thing inserts. So in a way, it's kind of like a chest of drawers, right? Where you have the void and this new drawer that's going in. The drawer is going to provide stability to this external surface. And until it provides that stability, you can't remove that external frame. But the fact that they built that external frame on the outside means that you have this opportunity to carve out on the inside. Denny, and then we'll be.
So I really like your project. I think it's very, knowing a little bit about Baltimore, not very much. I know, it would be a fun, sort of exciting place and that the city would appreciate. For me, the only thing there's a missed opportunity here, and I'm not sure if you missed it or if you didn't miss it, because I feel like, when I look at this section and I look at this kind of historic building and the kind of emptiness that's around it, and then I look at your plan, you have rendered it, so it seems like this is was part of your proposal. And I feel like that is a missed opportunity to think about. I mean, I tell my students, there's no designer that wouldn't want to go outside of their site to really try to affect the outside, the surroundings. And I feel like from an urban design standpoint, there's a great opportunity here to stitch together the city to actually create the kind of fabric that Noli sort of, would have liked.
Right.
And, your plan with four is also an odd number for trees, like 4 trees in the median, it just doesn't say urbanism to me. And I think this could have been a great opportunity also to show, and I feel like you probably have sort of forgotten about that corner or not had enough time to think about it, and which is why we don't have a perspective over it, which would be, to me, a selling point. Like I appreciate this. I can kind of visualize what a courtyard would look like, but to actually see this, and when I see this abrupt change and this kind of lack of a dialogue with, such an interesting building, to me, that's the piece that I would have explored a little bit more, whether it's through landscape, through some kind of a like a transition of sort, some kind of an arcade of sort that will start to dialogue and actually start to think about that as kind of a urban street. Because there is the reuse of the building, but there's also the kind of thinking about how to integrate it. And I think you kind of thought about it. So I feel like it's very interesting. And also circulation diagram. I don't know if I missed it at the beginning, but how do you get here? Which side would be most visible by cars, by pedestrians? That to me would be a great sort of addition to test
Yeah.
your ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was actually a great comment. I could almost see the small, what is that building again? It's a temple-like.
The McKim Center.
Kim Center, speaking to the classical language within your structure, right? So there's an opportunity for the street to actually become alive and having these two languages speak to each other by
Yep.
developing that. So I hope you're taking notes because this is like portfolio redux,
Yeah.
right? Which we've asked our students to do. Would you mind pointing to the fragment, the existing fragment on your plan?
My plan?
Pretty sure I know where it is. Don't trip.
Here.
Right. So at, at minimum, that needs to be rendered differently. So we look at the plan, we can see new and existing.
Yep.
What I think is really interesting, and this goes back to Irina's comment about DNA, a couple comments about tectonics and structure. Your partie diagram, interestingly, shows the yellow pulled away from that wrapper. And I think that's where your opportunity is, right?
Yeah.
What if you actually pulled the plan away from the wrapper and you started to articulate that zone into something really sort of innovative and new and transitioning to another language or a language that's informed by the existing DNA of the structure. So
Yeah.
that's actually what we've been dealing with in our studio, how to incorporate an existing historic fragment into a plan, a project. And so that then would need to be shown clearly in your sections, right? And carried through the entire design. Wall sections as well, showing new and old connections.
These are all really great comments. And I'm, you know, it's kind of interesting because things are turning in my mind as I'm hearing everybody else's comments. So what I keep focusing, looking at this site section in the center. And as I look at that picture and I look at that section, I think others have already said it. You know, again, same thing in plan, in section too, right? There's that wall. And then somebody used the term drawer. This is the drawer in that because it took me a while to understand that this is all new, where I thought this was all existing and this is just the new edge. And I think that's what everybody is getting at is like, wow, there was such a big idea moves that you could go, everything about this is very competent. And it's interesting because there's a lot here, like I've seen the rendering, and it's a challenge right now in the academic world where, you know, it's very quick and it's very plausible to do these sorts of renderings here. And because there's so much precedent that's accessible to you. Visually, there's so many things accessible to you. Our minds just say, there it is. What's really hard is to shut that down and to sit by yourself and say, what would I do? What's my creativity? What do I bring to the table? What's my individual voice? It's really, really hard to do these days. So what I do is it always goes back to the strongest, the simplest diagrams, and it's just a diagram. If you had a sectional diagram that represented the drawer and the wall, just I keep going there. Right? Everybody's building on what everybody says. You have a wall, and then you draw something that's just all new on the inside. And if you believe in that diagram and stick to it, keep the diagram simple, make the building complex and beautiful. That's the fun part as you move forward. This is a great project, by the way. It's great. But it's that kind of crossroads of where's your individuality in this? And you did everything competently and everything. And by the way, I have to say, everybody does great analysis here. We didn't do that level of analysis for our thesis. It's really, really great to hear. Bringing the public policy, the people, individuals, it's fantastic. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And just as a little bit of a sidebar, and I hope it doesn't embarrass Lawrence, but Lawrence's firm was one of the first firms to present when I was a member of the Downtown Bethesda Design Review Board. And I hadn't seen Lawrence in years, and I believe it was all online because it was in the middle of COVID. And I was kind of dreading it. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And the way in which Lawrence, and I'll take you at some point before you leave, I'll show you what he showed us. The diagrams made the project seem so inevitable. And the project got richer, but the diagrams were very, very simple diagrams. It clearly explained something, and it made it very easy for people, particularly people that weren't architects, because it's a public commission, it's a public board, review board. There are people that are neighbors that want to see what's going on, and it made it easier for them to understand. And I saw so many architects get into trouble where they didn't have a good story, or they didn't have good diagrams, or
they were getting too complex in the diagrams that nobody could follow them. So that's a really good piece of advice from somebody who knows what he's doing over there, Lawrence. Anybody else? Going once? Do you want us to keep
Going
talking?
twice?
Professor Campana? Professor Matthew Bell, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it's been a lot of fun to work with Christoph on this project, and sometimes thesis projects are like things you look at and you want to do something to. You know, I mean, there is the business of finding this historic facade, and I don't think anybody would disagree with the idea that you have to figure out how to reuse buildings if you want to continue to live in a city. It's just basic, you know. And as a partner of mine once pointed out to me, he said, really good buildings oftentimes outlive their original uses. And this is clearly a case of that, you know, even though the piece of it that's left is a fragment. I'm not quite sure I understand what benefits you gain by pulling your intervention away from that wall there. Maybe somebody can explain it to me. I just don't see it. I think what he was doing was trying to use the sort of spatial implication of the facade, which is this big room in the center, and center the building back in a big space the way it had been historically. And I think what you got from the jury is another way to do it, not necessarily a criticism of what you did. And I just want to make sure you understand that.
Got it.
People could do that and pull it away. The biggest technical issue you would have is differential settlement between the new building and the existing. So you'd have to design something that could move at the interface of those two things. And maybe what they're saying is what they really like is little monitors in there so you can see the building moving and stuff separately from the foundation. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very good idea to me. Anyhow, a couple of other things here. You still are not drawing this right. Kelly gave you the drawing. And I don't know why the Doric columns don't line up with the triglyphs and the metopes in the Doric architecture. I looked on my phone at the drawing Brian sent you, and they sure as hell do in the thing. So somehow you've decided that the Doric order is better like this, with the misalignment between the triglyphs and the metopes and the columns. I don't know why, but you. The government defines metope. Yes, so I don't like looking at that. But I have to give them a hard time because we told you to use the right drawing for this. Anyhow, I do think, though, the comment that was made about the materiality, I think, is a really good one, because I kind of feel like this is Photoshop brick in here that sort of gets stuck on there like Velcro. And I think maybe this didn't come early enough in the process to really look at the materiality of this. And fair enough here. And I'm a little bit wondering if perhaps we've overstructured this somehow, you know, in the skylight. It just seems like stuff that could get resolved further on. The other thing that's sort of interesting about this is that in modifying the building the way they did with the C shape and getting rid of this side and stuff, it actually gave him an opportunity to open that building up to that side and the plaza, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. Because there is a scenario of this that could have said, well, we just keep all four sides, and you might have had a very different project were that the case.
Right.
So whoever took that fourth wall down, in some respects, did you a favor, because it allowed you to kind of open the plaza up towards the McKim school building, and also to make this little plaza there, which is sort of an interesting thing to accept there. I think being able to make a project that looks like it intelligently adapts an existing building and in a way that reuses it, gives it rebirth, but doesn't look like an alien invasion, I think is a really good thing. And I think for me, when that started to happen for you, is when you just started to introduce a simple grid in both buildings that kind of gave some discipline to the exteriors and also to the plan. And that is a tried and true way to solve problems. You know, put a grid down and see if that helps you. And I think that in your case helped you very much. I think his original drawing here wasn't quite as backed out as this is. So we talked about backing it out and giving it more of a sense of the space, which is, I think, the corollary to that drawing, which I think is a good pairing of these things. I think, you know, finally, just to sort of sum up here, what is also interesting to me about it is this little fragment of a building, which was really worth keeping, engendered a whole question about urban design and grabbing onto these other pieces in the city fabric, such as the McKim School and also adding this other program piece, which is the gymnasium and the health center and retail and things like that. Just by looking at the fragment of this building, you're able to sort of then say, well, what else goes with this? And I think that's a really great way to approach adaptive reuse. Sometimes, you know, when I sit on the Historic Preservation easy for me to say, review board in DC, and people bring buildings in, and they just bring the building to look at, you know, and what you always want to say is, okay, what else is there? Tell us more about what's around it so we can make an intelligent decision about, you know, the whether or not this is sympathetic to the neighborhood and stuff. And what I like about this project, and what I really enjoyed working with you on, it was always this question of not just the building, but how does the building engage everything else around it, the program inside and the program outside. And I think that's what a thesis should do. A thesis should be able to sort of probe those things at a bunch of different scales. So, Christoph, you're finally rid of me. Okay, so congratulations, nice job.
Thank you.
And since we're running ahead of schedule here, Professor Bell, I know you had the last word, but I am often a Felix to your Oscar. And I just wanted to note that the confusion about the role of the stuff on the inside comes from the confusion in diagramming. So there's this diagram here, this suggests there is a separation. And right adjacent to it, there's something that's called a figure ground, which in my mind isn't a figure ground. Figure ground is supposed to be binary, black and white. And in this case, it's multicolor. But what belies things is that here, the yellow stuff is sticking to the wrapper, which is probably more like it. So there's an indecision on your part that led to a different interpretation of the jury. How about that? How about that? Anyhow, folks, thank you all for spending this afternoon with us. I just sent a note to everybody that's presenting tomorrow. If we could get those folks that are presenting tomorrow in the morning to pin up this evening before you leave and be ready to go, so there aren't the tremendous delays that we had today. And then for those of you that are presenting tomorrow afternoon, you'll have the time between noon and 1. And I do ask, all you guys have been fantastic helping each other out, making sure that stuff get on the wall, helping each other to get things done. So help each other get all this done. Take the work down rapidly that's been presented this afternoon. Get your stuff up and go have a nice, good night of sleep. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you to our reviewers. We couldn't do any of this without you. Oh, we could. It'd just be we'd just be talking to ourselves, which we do a lot too. So thank you all and have a nice afternoon. You're done. Well, not really.